The night snow blanketed the endless fields like a giant white quilt. The interstate bus groaned with a weary engine, its yellow lights spilling across the thin mist clinging to the windows. Farah leaned her forehead against the frozen glass, clutching a worn photograph. Her mother smiling gently on the front porch, a smile now surviving only in memory. Inside the bus, a few passengers dozed off, their heads swaying with the rattling wheels. The stale smell of cold coffee mixed with damp wool coats made Farah's throat tighten. Nebraska unfolded in the darkness like an abandoned land, vast tracts of earth, scattered farm lights flickering in the distance. With every mile, she felt herself drifting farther from everything she had once known. She closed her eyes. The engine's hum blended with the howl of the wind, and Afghanistan rushed back. Early mornings sneaking away to teach little girls in a cramped mud-brick room, the light in their eyes when they wrote their names for the first time. Then the boots pounding the street, gunfire echoing. That night she clung to her mother in the dark. Her mother whispered, "Farah, you must go. Staying means death." Those words still rang in Nebraska's silence, in a place where she had no idea what future awaited her. The memory returned so vividly that Farah could almost smell the smoke, hear the neighbors screaming as Taliban soldiers stormed the alley. She remembered her mother's hand shoving her through the back door, her heart pounding as she scrambled onto the bed of a truck with other women. The escape through Pakistan was a nightmare, nights hidden in dark compartments, drinking murky water, sleeping on bare ground. Eventually she reached a refugee camp in Islamabad, where UN staff wrote down every detail of her life. They asked, "Where do you want to go?" Farah had no answer. America, Germany, Canada, just distant names. But when they explained a program for women persecuted for teaching, she nodded. America, a word carrying both hope and fear. The bus turned into a small town. Streetlights appeared in scattered dots. A rusted sign glowed under yellow light. Redfield, population 3,872. The number was so small it weighed on her chest. In Kabul, even a narrow street held more lives. The bus door hissed open and a blade of icy wind cut through. She pulled her scarf tight, hugged her backpack, and stepped down slowly. The station was nothing but a sagging roof and rotting wooden benches. No shops open, no sound but the wind swirling flakes of snow. Farah stood still, feeling like a castaway dropped on alien soil. A figure approached from across the road, tall and lean in a heavy brown coat, holding a flashlight. The beam shone in her face, then lowered. The man smiled softly, his eyes lined with age.
Farah Mohseni.
She nodded, her voice trembling in the cold.
"Yes, I'm Farah."
He extended his hand, firmer and warmer than she expected.
I'm John, pastor of the local church. Welcome to Redfield. I'll take you to your lodging.
The word welcome felt foreign in the frozen night, but Farah forced a faint smile, following him to an old pickup parked by the road. The truck rolled through empty streets, yellow streetlights brushing over rows of white-painted wooden houses. Every window shuttered tight, as if the whole town had long gone to sleep. Farah pressed her face to the glass, watching leafless trees shiver in the wind. Back home, winters were harsh, but never this cold. Here, the chill seeped deeper, past the skin into the marrow.
"This place, it's so quiet."
Yes, quiet enough that some find it lonely. But for you, perhaps it means a safe beginning.
The word safe beginning made her chest tighten. Safety? What did that mean when neither her homeland nor her past had a place left to call home? The truck stopped before a small wooden house on the town's edge. Snow piled on the roof, a wooden cross hanging in the window. Pastor opened the door, switched on a warm yellow light, and led her in. The room was simple: a single bed with a wool blanket, a small wooden table, and a Bible placed neatly on top.
This will be your room. The parish sponsors it. You may stay as long as you need.
Thank you so much.
He smiled, poured her a cup of hot tea from a glass pot. Farah wrapped both hands around it, letting the warmth soothe her frozen fingers. Pastor sat across, his gaze gentle, not prying.
I know it isn't easy to arrive in a new place, especially Redfield. The town is kind but closed. They haven't met many people like you.
I understand. I'm used to being looked at differently.
The words slipped out softly, her eyes glistening. Pastor nodded, asking nothing more. After a quiet pause, he rose.
Rest now. Tomorrow I'll introduce you to a few folks. There's a thrift shop that needs help. The owner's a bit stern, but a good soul.
Yes, I'll work hard.
He smiled, laid a hand on her shoulder like a promise, and left the room. When the door closed, silence settled heavy. Farah set her mother's photo beside the Bible. Two worlds side by side, one gone forever, one unfamiliar and waiting. She wrapped herself in the blanket but could not sleep. Outside, the wind hissed through the cracks, carrying the smell of fresh snow. Staring at the wooden ceiling, she whispered into the night.
Mother, I made it here, but I don't know if this is truly a beginning or just another escape.
Redfield lay still in the dark, but inside Farah, every memory and fear kept flowing. The midnight bus had carried her to a new land, where she had yet to discover whether she would find safety or only another form of loneliness. Morning in Redfield was so quiet that Farah could hear the wind sweeping through the bare branches. The first thin sunlight slipped through the white curtain, casting wavering stripes across the wooden floor. She sat up, her eyes heavy after a sleepless night. Stepping onto the porch, the cold bit into her face. Before her stretched the small town. Peaked rooftops, gravel-covered streets, and beyond them, soybean fields reaching toward the horizon. Not a single person in sight, only the lonely rumble of a passing truck. Pastor John arrived in his dusty old blue pickup. He wore a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped at his neck, a steaming cup of coffee in hand.
Today, I'll take you to the repair shop. The owner's name is Hank Whitmore. He's not the friendliest, but he's got a good heart.
I understand. All I need is work.
The truck passed through the town square, just a small post office, a family diner, and the lone grocery store. Everything was so still, it felt to Farah like she was driving into a painting. Finally, the truck turned down a narrow street where a weathered wooden sign appeared. Hank's Fix-It. Buy, sell, repair. The shop was an old brick building, its windows fogged, the sign hanging crooked. Pastor pushed the door open, the bell chimed, and the smell of old wood and rusted metal filled the air. Farah stepped inside, taking in shelves stacked with radios, fans, desk lamps, sewing machines, even broken rocking chairs. The place looked like a graveyard of objects, each carrying its own history. From the back came the sound of metal striking. A man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, short grey hair, a beard flecked with silver. His blue shirt was rolled at the sleeves, stained with grease. His pale blue eyes were lined, hardened, and weary. He wiped his hands on a rag, glanced at Pastor, then at Farah.
Hank, this is Farah. She just arrived from Afghanistan and needs work to start over. I thought your shop could use an extra hand.
Hank studied her. His look wasn't hostile, nor was it welcoming. Just the gaze of someone who had seen too much and spared little for words. He gave a small nod and tossed the rag onto the counter.
What can you do?
I can clean, keep records, sell things. I learn quickly.
Hank was silent for the few seconds, then pointed to the dust-covered counter.
Clean that. If you can do it, you can stay.
Farah bowed her head, picked up a rag, and began scrubbing the thick layer of dust. Her hands trembled from the cold, but she kept steady. Pastor John smiled encouragingly before turning to Hank.
Don't be too harsh. She's been through a lot.
Everyone has been through something. Around here, you work, or you go home.
The words were blunt, but not unkind. Farah gave a small smile, used to such rough edges. In silence, she wiped until the wood gleamed again. Hank watched from a distance, his mind tugged by memory. For a brief moment, he saw another Afghan woman, one who had once stitched up his wounds in a military camp with the same small, patient hands. The memory pulled him back. 25 years old, blood pouring down his arm after an explosion. Amid chaos, a woman dragged him into a tent, washed the wound with well water, sewed it with trembling but steady stitches. She said nothing, leaving only a look of sorrow as he was carried away. Those hands had haunted him ever since. And now, looking at Farah, the memory stirred again. Hank blinked hard, turned away, and cleared his throat.
Then start sorting those radios. See which ones still work.
Farah glanced at the long row of dusty radios, nodded, rolled up her sleeves, and set to work. Pastor John said goodbye and left, the bell chiming behind him. Now it was only Farah and Hank, the shop filled with the clink of tools and the hum of silence. She lifted each radio, wiping them down, arranging them neatly. Now and then she twisted a knob. Static crackled, breaking the hush. One small radio flickered to life, leaking faint country music. Farah froze, listening. Back home, the radio had been her only window to the world, when Taliban rule forbade women from reading newspapers or watching television. The sound, though foreign, stung her eyes with tears. Hank looked up from his bench, noticing her lips moving faintly to the melody. He thought of speaking, then didn't. He returned to the broken lamp, turning a screw, but his eyes kept straying toward her. By noon, Hank pulled out a lunchbox, eating in silence at the corner table. Farah kept working, hands still on the radios. He frowned.
You're not eating?
I don't have anything. I'll eat at home.
If you work here, you'll need strength. Take some.
He pushed the lunchbox toward her. Farah hesitated, then nodded slightly. She took a piece of bread, chewing slowly. The taste was unfamiliar, a little salty, but the warmth of food eased her chest. Outside, the wind swept through empty streets. Inside, surrounded by relics of forgotten lives, two strangers, an American man locked in silence and an Afghan woman starting over, shared that silence. And in it, the first crack between their worlds began to form. On her first Sunday in Redfield, Farah wrapped herself in the thin coat Pastor John had given her and followed him to the town's church. The morning was bright yet biting, her breath turning white in the air. Families in heavy coats gathered, children ran across the churchyard, while she kept close, clutching her worn brown hijab tight around her shoulders. The church was built of red brick, its steeple stretching into the clear sky. When the wooden doors opened, the ringing of the bells made her chest tighten. Back home, the call to prayer had once been the rhythm of daily life. Here, this sound felt foreign, like a language she didn't know. Inside, rows of wooden pews faced stained glass windows that painted holy figures in coloured light. The townsfolk sat neatly together, most of them pale faces, blonde hair, kind eyes that still glanced at her with curiosity or doubt. Farah felt it, sharp and unspoken. Pastor John led her to a seat in the back. He smiled warmly to those nearby, while Farah kept her head bowed, her hand gripping the small Bible he'd just handed her. Prayers rose, hymns swelled and fell, but in her heart there was only distance. After the service, a few women approached with polite questions.
Where are you from?
Afghanistan.
They exchanged a look. One forced a small smile.
Oh, that's far. Must be very different from here.
Yes, very different.
Their smiles faded quickly. They nodded to Pastor John, then walked away. Farah stood still, feeling like an exhibit on display. She tugged her scarf tighter and drew a long breath. A white boy, maybe 10, dashed past and nearly bumped her. He stopped, staring wide-eyed at the scarf around her head. "You look like the people on TV," from over the ocean. Farah froze, her heartbeat quickening as memories of gunfire surged back. But the boy only grinned and ran off. She shut her eyes, swallowing the hollow ache of being out of place. Pastor John came over, his hand light on her shoulder.
They'll need time. Don't let their stares make you smaller.
I'm used to it, but sometimes it feels like I'm invisible. Or worse, a shadow that doesn't belong.
Pastor John said nothing more, just handed her a warm cup of coffee from the church kitchen. She inhaled its scent, managing a faint smile. On the walk home, the town remained hushed as ever. Farah looked at the rows of wooden houses, the American flags hanging from porches. She remembered Kabul's crowded alleys, the sound of children reciting lessons in the dark. Back then, she had told them that words were the strongest weapon they could carry. But here, in Redfield, she wasn't sure if that weapon meant anything at all. That night, in her small room, Farah spread her prayer rug across the floor and knelt, whispering in Dari. Outside, the church bells rang again. 2 sounds, 2 worlds running side by side. She clasped her hands, eyes lifting to the wooden ceiling, and whispered,
Please, let me find a place, anywhere.
And in that silence, she realized her journey ahead was not only to find shelter, but to find a place where she could be seen as herself. Afternoon settled in, the pale light slipping through the fogged windows of Hank's Fix-It and stretching in long stripes across the tiled floor. The cold crept through the doorframe, carrying the sound of wind slicing down the empty street. Farah sat alone behind the counter, a small old radio in her hands, no bigger than her palm. The dust was gone, but it remained stubbornly silent. She turned the dial, straining to listen. Only static, low and crackling, then sharp and shrill, like distant whispers from someone who would never answer. She bit her lip, tried again, her heartbeat quickening when a faint line of music flickered, then vanished. Kabul returned to her mind. Knights huddled in a corner, tuning her father's radio for scraps of news from the outside world. In the dark, the radio had been her lifeline, proof that somewhere women could learn, work, and speak freely. Now in Nebraska, she sat before another old radio, unsure if it would bring her closer to, or farther from, that world. A clang of metal startled her. Hank was still at his workbench, broad hands soldering a broken desk lamp. He didn't look at her, but she knew he had noticed every move she made. She lowered her gaze, reminding herself not to cause trouble. She tried the dial once more. This time the static roared, rattling the shelves. Flustered, she twisted at the knob, but it jammed. A shadow fell across her.
Leave it.
His voice was rough, deep, right behind her. Before she could react, his calloused hand took the radio from hers. He set it firmly on the counter, snapping open the back panel with swift, practiced movements.
This one's old. Little dusting won't make it sing.
He pulled out corroded wires, shook his head, and brushed a fingertip across the fragile circuit. Farah stood still, eyes fixed on his hands. Something in his focus felt familiar, the way those large, worn hands moved quickly, almost tenderly, like the memory of stitching himself back together on a battlefield. In minutes, faint country music crackled out of the speaker. The sound was simple, uneven, but to Farah it beat like a living pulse. She pressed her lips together, then whispered,
Thank you.
Hank looked up. His pale eyes lingered on her face, tired, yet lit with gratitude. For a fleeting moment, something in his chest eased. He gave a short nod, setting the radio back on the counter.
Don't thank me. Just don't break another one.
His tone was dry, but not harsh. Farah dipped her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She turned to clean another radio while Hank returned to his lamp. In the quiet room, only the weak music and the clink of metal filled the air. Two strangers, one who had lost a homeland, one who had lost peace, shared the same space. No more words were needed. A thank you and a radio brought back to life had already closed the distance between them. A soft thud echoed when Farah accidentally knocked a dust-covered notebook from the shelf. She bent to pick it up, then lifted her gaze and froze. Behind the counter, the wall was plastered with dozens of old photographs, their edges yellowed with age. Faces of young men in uniform standing under the harsh sun. Some grinned broadly, some posed awkwardly, some stared into the camera with distant eyes. And in a few, she recognized Hank, much younger, hair dark and thick, his face sharper, his eyes bright but tense. She stepped closer. In one photo, 6 American soldiers leaned against a jeep, arms slung over each other's shoulders, rifles hanging loosely at their sides. Their smiles were wide, but their lips cracked and dry, as if all of them were trying to look normal in a world that was anything but. Farah touched the corner of the photo lightly, her chest tightening.
Faces? Still so young?
Her voice was barely a whisper, almost to herself. But Hank heard. He rose from his workbench and walked over, his tall frame casting a shadow across the light. His pale blue eyes narrowed when he saw her hand on the photo.
Don't touch that.
Startled, Farah pulled her hand back at once.
I'm sorry, I was just curious.
Hank stood still for a moment. His shoulders sagged, as if he no longer had the strength to be angry. Folding his arms, his eyes fixed on the photo of the 6 men.
They're the ones who didn't come back.
The words were flat, but heavy as confession. Farah turned toward him and caught the silent grief in his eyes. Something no outsider could fully understand. Her chest ached. The images of her mother, her girl students, her friends who had taught in secret flashed before her mind. They too were the ones who never came back, names kept alive only in memory, bodies she could no longer touch or call.
I have them too.
Hank glanced at her, his look sharp.
Have what?
People who will never return.
Silence draped the room. Farah lowered her head, her eyes burning though she held back tears. Hank clenched his arms tighter, then let them fall. He turned, his fingertip brushing the edge of the photo, tracing it as if to hold the memory from fading.
War doesn't give anything back. It only knows how to take.
Farah nodded slowly. The words echoed inside her, needing no explanation. She too was a witness. In the dim light and the smell of rusted metal, the two of them stood side by side without another word. And in that silence, a shared grief was acknowledged, scars invisible on the skin, but clear in their eyes. The bell above the glass door jingled as it swung open. A middle-aged man in a brown coat stepped inside, cradling a worn birdcage. The wooden bars were chewed by termites, the metal latch eaten through with rust.
Hank, see if you can fix this. My old bird's got nowhere else to stay.
Hank glanced up from his workbench, gave the cage a quick look and grunted.
Cheaper to buy a new one.
The man shrugged, setting the cage on the counter.
It's been in this cage for over 10 years. I don't want to change it.
Farah stood quietly in the back, her eyes lingering on the splintered wood. Without a word, she stepped forward, crouched, and ran her hand gently over the cracks. Her slender fingers traced the broken lines with the same focus she once had when mending torn clothes for children in Kabul. From a drawer, she pulled a small spool of cord and a curved needle, then began tying each broken piece in place. Her movements were slow but steady, her hands trembling faintly under the yellow light. The man watched, surprised, then broke into a smile.
You've got skill.
Hank remained at his bench, a small hammer in hand, but his eyes didn't leave Farah. In her careful motions he saw another image rise unbidden. Thin Afghan hands stitching his torn flesh long ago. The stitches had trembled, but they never stopped, each one anchoring him to life. Hank's grip tightened on the hammer before he set it down with a sigh. He told himself he was mistaken, but the memory refused to fade. When Farah finished, the cage was still old but firmly braced, strong enough to hold a while longer. She smiled and handed it back.
Now your bird won't slip out anymore.
The man nodded gratefully, left a few crumpled bills on the counter, and walked out with the cage in his arms. The door shut, and the shop grew quiet again. Farah turned toward Hank, her eyes waiting. He only snorted, his voice rough.
Don't think you can fix everything with a bit of string. Not everything broken can be put back together.
Farah paused, then gave a faint smile.
But at least it gets another chance to stay.
Hank didn't answer. He turned back to his work, pretending to focus on the broken lamp. Yet in his chest, the image of those hands, steady, determined, refusing to let go, lingered stubbornly, leaving him more unsettled than he cared to admit. The wind howled outside, pressing snow against the glass until it crackled like tiny stones. Suddenly, the lights inside the shop went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole, leaving only the faint rattle of loose metal somewhere in the shelves.
Oh,
The sound slipped from her lips, soft but trembling. Her heart clenched. She froze, unable to move. Kabul came rushing back. One quiet night, then pounding fists at the door, shouts, boots crashing on the floorboards. Darkness had swallowed her mother then. Since that night, night itself meant loss. A sound stirred behind her. She spun, eyes wide, but saw nothing beyond the black.
Power outage. Happens all the time in Redfield.
His gravelly voice cut through the fear, pulling her back. A small light flickered. Hank's old lighter sparking to life, its trembling flame casting his weathered face in shifting gold. The weak glow stretched over the wall of broken things, pushing back the absolute dark.
Sit down. I'll make some coffee.
He disappeared into the back. Farah listened to the clatter of metal, the pour of water into a kettle, then the smell, burnt, rich coffee filling the shop. It was foreign, yet comforting. She sank onto a chair, fingers twined tight, listening to the wind outside blend with the bubbling of boiling water. Moments later, Hank returned with 2 enamel cups steaming in his hands. He set one in front of her, then took the seat across.
Hold on to that. Gets cold quick around here.
Farah cupped it with both hands. Warmth spread through her fingertips, up her arms, into her chest. She exhaled, the bitter scent filling her lungs. In the glow of a flashlight on the table, Hank's pale eyes looked softer, more intent than usual.
You afraid of the dark?
She stiffened. The question was blunt, cutting right to the bone. She tried to smile, but her lips wouldn't move. After a pause, she sighed.
back home, night was when people disappeared.
Hank said nothing, just listened. She lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper.
That night, the Taliban came. My mother and I were teaching girls in a mudroom. I ran. She stayed. I remember the scream, then the dark. Since then, I've never trusted night to be safe.
Her grip on the cup trembled. Hank's eyes stayed on her, no longer stern, but heavy with unspoken understanding. He turned his cup in his hand, then said quietly,
I lost someone too. Not at night, but under the brightest sun. My wife. Cancer. I came home from war thinking I had a lifetime with her. A year later, she was gone. I never got to say what I should have said.
Silence spread between them. Two people, two worlds, now sitting across from each other, bound by shadows no one else could see. Farah lifted the cup, took a sip. The coffee was harshly bitter, but that bitterness grounded her, as if pain itself was being acknowledged.
Maybe we're both the ones war left behind.
Hank looked up, his eyes meeting hers. No pity there, only a quiet truth. He nodded, lips pressed thin, then spoke.
Yeah, surviving. Sometimes that's the heaviest load.
The words stilled her. He was right. Survival meant carrying the memory of those who didn't return. Both she and he were living in place of someone else. Outside, the snow thickened, the wind wailing like a cry. Inside, two people sat close in the dark, lit only by a flickering beam and the steam from their cups. No more words were needed. In that silence, they both understood. They weren't entirely alone anymore. Saturday morning brought rare sunshine to Redfield after days of heavy snow. Farah was wiping the counter when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see an American woman in her 30s step inside. Brown hair pulled back, long wool coat, grey-blue eyes, bright but cold. The woman walked straight in, her gaze sweeping the shop before settling on Farah. Her expression tightened, as if something about the sight unsettled her.
"Where's Dad?"
Her voice was clipped, ignoring Farah's tentative greeting. Before Farah could answer, Hank emerged from the back, grease still on his hands.
Martha, what are you doing here?
Farah blinked. Martha, his daughter.
"Can't I visit my own father, or do I need an appointment?"
Her sharp tone cut through the shop's usual quiet. She flicked her eyes toward Farah, suspicion rising.
"And who's she?"
Hank's brow furrowed, his voice measured.
This is Farah. She works here.
Works? Or one of those sponsored refugees the town chips in to support?
The words landed like a blade. Farah stiffened, heat flooding her cheeks. She wanted to speak, but Hank stepped in front of her.
That's enough, Martha.
"I'm only asking. Mom's gone, and you never said a word. You disappeared into this pile of broken junk, and now you bring home a stranger. I have the right to wonder."
Hank's fists clenched, his shoulders trembling. Farah could see the tension etched deep in his face. This wasn't about her alone, but an old fracture between father and daughter.
Your mother, that...
His voice cracked and fell silent. Martha stood still for a moment, her eyes reddening though her chin stayed high.
"I waited for you to say something, just once, but you never did."
She spun on her heel, the door slamming shut behind her, the bell rattling wildly. The shop sank back into silence, but it was no longer calm. Hank stood frozen, avoiding Farah's gaze.
Get back to work.
His voice was hoarse, brittle, as if trying to sweep everything away. Farah said nothing, only bent down to keep wiping the counter. But inside, she understood Hank more clearly. His silence wasn't just about the war. It was about his family, too. That evening, Pastor John stopped by with a bundle of donated goods. As Farah recounted the encounter with Martha in halting words, he sighed and lowered himself into an old chair.
Children rarely understand a parent's silence. But parents aren't good at speaking either.
He paused, then his tone softened.
Farah, I know you still want to teach. At the church, there are children who need English lessons. Kids from immigrant families and some from the parish. Would you be willing to try?
Farah's eyes widened, her heart racing. Teaching, the one calling she thought she had lost forever, was being offered back to her. She smiled, nodding gently.
Yes, I'll try.
Pastor John stood, returning her smile.
Then start next week, but be ready. This town may not be ready yet.
After he left, Farah stood alone in the shop, her hand brushing the dusty wooden sign. For the first time, she felt a flicker of light in Redfield, small, fragile, but warm enough to hold on to. Night had fallen, the cold wind sweeping across the churchyard in Redfield. Inside a small classroom, Farah leaned over to arrange the old wooden desks into a circle. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting trembling streaks across the floor. On the chalkboard, she wrote slowly, "Hello, my name is..." Children bustled in, coats dusted with snow. Some were the sons and daughters of immigrant families from Mexico and Guatemala, their bright eyes shining despite long days in the fields. A few were different. 2 blonde-haired kids from local church families sent by Pastor John to learn English alongside their new friends.
All right, repeat after me. Hello, my name is...
The room filled with halting voices, laughter bubbling between mistakes. One boy stumbled over name, blurting out numb, and the whole class erupted in giggles. Farah laughed with them, her smile warming the air like a small fire against winter's chill. Out in the hall, Pastor John watched with gentle eyes, though a flicker of worry clouded his face. He could see Farah reclaiming herself with a piece of chalk in hand. But he also knew Redfield was a town slow to welcome what was different. When the lesson ended and the children spilled into the snowy yard, a woman stepped forward. American, neatly dressed in a thick coat, her hair curled tight, her sharp gaze fixed on Farah.
Pastor, I need to say this. I'm not comfortable with my child being taught by someone like her.
Farah hugged the stack of books to her chest. Pastor John stepped closer, his tone calm.
She's teaching English for free, and the children are enjoying it.
But she wears that scarf. My child came home asking why the teacher doesn't look like us. I don't want him confused.
Farah lowered her eyes, her heart twisting. In Kabul, the hijab had been her shield. Here, it was the reason she was turned away.
Our faith teaches us to love and welcome the stranger.
The woman pressed her lips tight, said nothing more, and tugged her child away. Her heels struck the floor hard, leaving behind a heavy silence. Farah clutched her books tighter.
If I'm causing trouble, I can stop.
Pastor John looked at her, sadness in his eyes but resolve in his voice.
No, Farah. This is the right path, but be ready. Redfield won't make it easy.
She nodded slowly. Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the churchyard in white. Inside her heart, one thought rang clear. She had lost her homeland, but she would not lose her right to teach. Every word written on the board was a door opening. The shop bell chimed, shattering the steady clink of tools in the workshop. Farah bent over her notes, looked up to see a stranger step inside. A tall man, shoulders wrapped in a worn leather jacket, grey-streaked hair slick with sweat. His cold grey eyes swept the room before landing on Hank, who had just stepped out from the back.
Hank Whitmore, how many years has it been?
Hank froze, the rag slipping from his hand. His voice dropped, rasping low.
Tom Keller.
The man, Tom, curved his mouth into a smile that carried no warmth.
I figured you'd stayed behind in Helmand. Never thought you'd crawl out alive, only to end up here, fixing junk for farmers.
The air thickened instantly. From behind the counter, Farah clutched her notebook tight, watching the two men as though a ghost had walked in from the dust of war.
You remember that night, don't you, Hank? The night you went down, bleeding like a busted river. If some Afghan woman hadn't dragged you into a corner and stitched you up, you wouldn't be standing here.
Hank's fist clenched, tendons rising under his skin, his eyes darkening. Farah's pulse quickened. It was the first time she had heard the truth spoken aloud, the reason for Hank's strange glances at her hands, the silence that lingered in his eyes.
The unit called you the guy saved by the enemy. Funny, isn't it? An American soldier owing his life to an Afghan woman. Did you bury that story deep because it shamed you?
Hank stepped forward, his boots striking the floor hard.
Shut your mouth and get out, Tom.
Tom raised his brows, his gaze sliding briefly to Farah before twisting into a smirk.
Now I see. You've got another Afghan here in your shop. Trying to make amends, Hank? Or relive that night all over again?
Hank roared, his palm slamming the counter, bolts and screws rattling in their jars.
Out, now!
The glass door shuddered as Tom shrugged, turned his back, and tossed a look half mocking, half pitying before pushing it open. The bell jangled long and cold as he left, leaving the room in a heavy silence. Hank stood trembling, his shoulders quaking. Farah gathered her courage, her voice small and fragile.
That woman? She really saved you?
Hank didn't turn. He stooped to pick up the rag, his hand unsteady. After a long pause, his voice broke in a hoarse whisper.
Some things I wish I could forget, but war doesn't let you.
The memory surged. The shop disappeared. No smell of old wood, no lamplight, only the stench of blood and dust. He saw himself lying there again, breath ragged, heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then those hands appeared, thin, bare, slick with his blood, but refusing to let go. Each stitch pierced his flesh, sharp enough to make him faint. But her eyes held him awake, dark, deep, steady as stone. He had tried to choke out "thank you," but only blood filled his mouth. She didn't answer, just kept sewing, as though his life was the only task left in the world. Then the soldiers dragged him away. He looked back, catching her gaze one last time in the shadows before she vanished. He never learned her name, never knew if she survived. Only that from that night on, he carried a debt without a name, a debt he could never repay. Hank blinked hard, the memory receding like a tide, leaving him in the silent shop again. His breath came heavy, his words rough.
Some memories, they don't rot. They just wait until they come back and bite you.
Farah clutched her notebook to her chest, her heart weighed down. She said nothing, but inside she understood. Every time Hank looked at her hands, he wasn't just seeing her. He was seeing the ghost of an unknown woman who had kept him alive, and the scar he carried ever since. Morning in Redfield dragged itself awake after a long night of wind. Hank's fix-it opened as usual, the inside air cold and still. Farah stepped in, clutching a small cardboard box to her chest, her posture both nervous and deliberate. She set the box on Hank's workbench. He looked up, hands still smeared with metal dust, his brows pulling tight.
What's this?
Farah lifted the lid. Inside lay the old radio, the very one she had fumbled with on her first day, the one Hank had snatched away and repaired himself. Now it was different. The thick dust was gone, the broken dial replaced, the wooden casing polished with oil until it shone. The chipped corners had been carefully sanded smooth. It was still the same radio, yet it seemed to carry a new life.
I wanted to give this back. The first day I came here, I broke it. You fixed it, but I still felt guilty. I wanted it to look right again, worthy of your table.
She turned the dial. Static sputtered. Then a faint AM tune spilled out. Crackling, uneven, yet warm. The old country melody drifted through the quiet shop, softening its air. Hank stared at the radio, his eyes clouding for a moment. The sound carried him back to mornings in the barracks, when the day began with news crackling from a radio mixed with desert wind scraping against wire fences. His hand reached out, brushing the polished wood, pausing at the new dial. For a second, his lips pressed tight, then quivered faintly. Without a word, Hank pulled the radio closer and set it in a corner of his workbench, the space reserved for things he never threw away. Farah bowed her head with a small smile, then turned quietly back to her work. All day long, Hank hammered, tightened screws, the clink of tools steady as always. But Farah noticed. The radio stayed on, humming through its fractured signal. And each time the music rose, Hank's hands hesitated, just for a beat, as if allowing memory to wash through him before he carried on. To Farah, the radio was no longer just a relic. It was a thread binding his past to her presence, a small reminder that the past could be tended, not only remembered, but lived forward. In Redfield, gossip travelled faster than the wind. It needed no proof, only a careless word. This time, it began at church. During a parents' meeting, when the evening classes Farah taught were mentioned, a white woman let slip a half-joke, half-remark.
A widowed man living shut away, now spending every day with a young woman in that repair shop. Who knows what happens after closing time?
For a moment, the room went silent. Then soft chuckles and whispers followed. From there, the story spread to the cafe, the barber shop, and soon became the unspoken truth of the town. Old Hank tangled up with the Muslim girl. Farah noticed it first. At the supermarket, two women whispered and turned away as she walked in. At church, cold stares landed on her hijab, not just curious now, but edged with disdain. A child who once laughed in her class now avoided her eyes. She forced a smile, but inside it weighed heavy. In Kabul, threats came with fists pounding on doors at night. In Redfield, they came as whispers behind her back. Hank heard it from Bill. Friday night, as usual, he stepped into the small bar. Bill, his old comrade from the war, dragged a chair over and lowered his voice.
Hank, you need to know. Folks are saying You and that girl. It's not good.
Hank said nothing, his face tightening. Bill's eyes held pity and helplessness.
I don't believe it. But this town's small. You know how it is. Once it spreads, there's no stopping it.
Hank gave a single nod, pushed back his chair, leaving the beer untouched. He stepped out into the street, the cold wind striking his face. Bill's words echoed. Folks are saying... Instead of heading home, he turned another way. Minutes later, he stood before the Redfield church. Yellow light spilled through stained glass windows, glowing against the snow. He pushed the door open. Pastor John was straightening chairs for Sunday service. Seeing Hank, he looked surprised.
Hank, this late? What brings you here?
Hank walked forward, his shadow stretching across the stone floor. His voice was low, gravelly, but it carried like a challenge.
I just want to know, does kindness need a permit, Pastor?
The question hung in the hollow air, echoing in the empty nave. Pastor John stilled, then looked at him for a long moment, his gaze heavy with sorrow.
No, but people fear what they don't understand. And when they're afraid, they turn it into gossip.
Hank stood there, shoulders heavy. He nodded once, said nothing more, and turned away. Outside, the wind howled down the deserted street. In his chest, another question lingered, refusing to leave. Was there any place where kindness could exist without needing defense? Morning in Redfield was cold and dim. Farah stepped into the shop, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. She set her backpack in the corner and began arranging the shelves, though her hands trembled faintly with fatigue. From his workbench, Hank looked up, his sharp gaze lingering on her longer than usual.
You didn't sleep, did you?
Farah paused, then forced a small smile.
I slept, but I dreamed. Old dreams. Back home. Night was when people disappeared. I'm afraid of the dark, Hank. It swallowed my mother.
The words slipped out, quiet as breath, yet they thickened the air in the shop. Hank's eyes darkened. He understood. This wasn't a child's fear of shadows, but the mark of someone who had survived war. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rose and walked into the workshop. A moment later, he returned with an old military flashlight, its metal casing scuffed but its beam still strong. He set it down on the counter in front of her.
Here, take it. This is America. If you disappear, I'll know.
Farah looked from the flashlight to him. Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes, but she smiled softly. She picked it up, gripping it as if it were a talisman. Hank turned back to his bench, saying nothing more. Farah bent over the counter, clutching the flashlight to her chest. For the first time in many nights, the dark no longer felt like an enemy. Noon in Redfield, the phone rang in Pastor John's cramped office. His voice was steady as always, but after only a few exchanges, his face sank.
I understand, yes, but she's only just begun to settle here. There's no other way.
A pause, then he nodded, exhaling heavily.
All right, I'll let them know. Thank you.
When he set the receiver down, his shoulders slumped. Light from the window fell across his lined face, deepening the weariness there. He knew this news would shatter the fragile world Farah had begun to build. That afternoon, he called Hank and Farah into his office. The narrow room was cluttered with Bibles, files, and a wooden cross on the wall. Farah sat opposite him, her hands locked together in her lap. Hank leaned against the wall, arms folded, silent.
Farah. Hank. I just got a call from immigration. The special sponsorship program for Afghan women, the program that brought you here, has lost its funding.
The words cut like a blade. Farah froze, her mouth parting, but no sound came. Her heartbeat thundered, her ears filled with rushing silence.
What does that mean, Pastor?
Pastor John braced his hands on the desk, his voice heavy.
It means they may relocate you to another state, where funding and housing still remain. Nebraska can't keep you.
Farah's vision blurred. the light and shadows around her collapsing. Every small effort she had made since arriving, learning to greet strangers, arranging shelves, brewing quiet cups of tea, suddenly felt like dust.
But I don't want to go. I was only just starting to feel like I could belong here.
Pastor John's eyes softened with sorrow.
I know, Farah, I argued, but the law is the law. I didn't want the letter to come as a shock.
Silence thickened. The clock on the wall ticked, its steady beat pressing the three of them deeper into the gloom. Then Pastor John lifted his gaze, lowering his voice.
There is one way. I hate to even mention it, but if you were legally married to an American citizen, you'd be allowed to stay. No one could force you out.
The air froze. Farah bowed her head, her lips trembling. The meaning was clear. Marriage was no longer a vow, but a permit for survival. She glanced toward Hank. He remained against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. No expression, no protest, no agreement. His silence weighed heavier than Pastor John's words. Farah turned back, forcing a thin, brittle smile.
I understand. Thank you for telling me.
Pastor John gave a faint nod, gripping the file as if he might speak again, but stopped. He only looked at Farah with a sorrow that seemed to ache from his bones. As they left the office, Hank opened the door, letting Farah step out first. For a brief instant as she passed, he lifted his eyes to hers. Something unspoken flickered there, a helplessness, mingled with a quiet, buried resolve. Farah walked on, her heart tangled. Each step felt as if it landed on empty air. Somewhere far away, official seals and papers were poised to decide her fate. And here, beside her, stood a man who stayed silent, offering no promise, yet whose silence shook her more deeply than any vow. That afternoon, the Redfield sky hung heavy with clouds. The wind carried damp earth and the promise of the first spring rain. Hank's fix-it was already closed, but Farah sat at the counter, staring at her hands in silence. The old flashlight he'd given her lay beside them, cold, steady, and unyielding. Hank stepped out from the workshop, brushing dust from his shirt. He looked at her, slender shoulders drawn tight, eyes lost in thought. For a moment he drew a deep breath, then spoke, his voice low and deliberate.
Farah, there's a way for you not to be taken away. Marriage. With me.
The air shifted, as if the room itself staggered. Farah's head snapped up, her eyes wide in disbelief.
What did you just say?
I said, we could marry. Just legally. No feelings required. Only so you can stay.
Wind rushed through the cracks, tugging the curtain. Farah shot to her feet, her heart hammering.
You think I need to stay so badly I'd trade away my dignity? That I'd marry someone just to have a foothold in this country?
Hank stepped back, a flicker of hurt flashing in his eyes.
I'm not saying you'd trade anything. I don't want you to disappear.
The words were clumsy, but they carried a fear he had no name for. He had already lost too much: comrades, a wife, the fragile piece of memory. Now, with Farah before him, he felt she was a fragile piece he could not afford to lose. The thought of her vanishing carved a hollow he knew too well. But for Farah, his words cut like a blade. She turned away, fighting to hold back the tears.
You don't understand. I've been running my whole life, from Kabul to here. I don't want to exist only because of a piece of paper. If I stay, it has to be because I truly belong.
Outside, the rain began to fall. The first drops drumming against the tin roof, heavy and insistent. The room thickened with the mingled scents of wet earth and machine oil. Farah stepped onto the porch, staring into the rain. Hank followed, stopping at the doorway. They stood there. She in the downpour, he in the shadowed eve, just one step apart. Rain soaked her hair and coat, clinging to her like chains. Hank longed to speak, to move toward her, but his feet felt anchored in lead. In the end, no words bridged the silence. They parted with nothing spoken. Farah standing in the storm, Hank in the darkened doorway, the distance between them wider than the empty street beyond. The first rain had passed, leaving puddles shining under the yellow lamps of Redfield's quiet streets. In the small room of the parish shelter, Farah sat frozen at the wooden table. The harsh words exchanged with Hank beneath the awning still echoed inside her, each sentence an unhealed cut. She no longer cried, but her eyes were swollen, heavy. Each blink brought back the image of Hank in the doorway, his gaze filled with helplessness. Emptiness spread in her chest, as if everything she had fought to cling to here was slipping away, washed off the streets with the rain. On the table lay the old flashlight Hank had given her. She placed her hand on it, searching for warmth, but the cold metal only reminded her of the distance between them, greater now than ever. Then came 3 knocks at the door, short, firm. Farah startled, rising quickly. She opened the door. Martha stood there. Her brown hair clung wet against her face, her coat darkened with rain. Her features were taut, her grey-blue eyes glinting in the hall light, not aloof this time, but brimming with restrained resolve.
I need to speak with you.
Her voice was low, decisive. Farah stepped aside. Martha entered, carrying with her the scent of rain. She didn't sit at first, only stood at the table staring at the wood grain as if gathering courage. Then she pulled out a chair and sat. From her coat pocket, Martha drew a weathered envelope, its edges yellowed and soft with age. She placed it on the table, her hand trembling slightly, though her gaze stayed fixed on Farah.
This belonged to my mother. Before she passed, she gave it to me, telling me, when the time was right, I should give it to my father. I've held on to it for years. Tonight, I think you should read it too.
Farah froze. Her fingers touched the envelope, fragile as if it contained someone else's memory. She slid out the paper, its musty scent rising. The handwriting was delicate, shaky. Hank, if one day you meet someone who makes you speak without needing whiskey, who makes you lift your head without effort, then please, don't let the past keep you bound. I want you to live, not just exist. And if our daughter resists, forgive her. She only does so because she loves you the way I once did. Farah sat still, each word etching into her heart. The room fell silent, but for the ticking of the clock. She lifted her gaze. Martha was watching, her eyes hard, though tears brimmed at the edges.
I don't trust you yet, and I'm not saying I've accepted you. But I can see, my father is different. He drinks less. He speaks more. I don't know if it's because of you, but that change started when you arrived.
Farah bowed her head, clutching the letter, her lips trembling but silent. This wasn't the moment to defend herself.
My mother wanted him to live. If your presence, even just a little, helps him do that, then I won't stand in the way.
Her voice cracked on the last words. She inhaled deeply, rose, and tightened her coat. Her face remained proud, but her eyes had softened.
Don't mistake me. I still don't like you. But, for my mother's sake, I won't fight you anymore.
With that, she turned and left. The door closed gently, leaving Farah in silence once again. Farah set the letter on the table, her fingers tracing the faded ink. Beside it lay the flashlight, its metal glint catching the lamplight. In that moment, she felt a fragile thread binding 3 lives together, a woman long gone, a daughter still wounded, and a wanderer like herself, all converging on the life of a man named Hank. March arrived, and Redfield stirred with preparations for the spring fair. Balloons hung along Main Street, wooden stalls went up. Vendors displayed jars of apple jam and wreaths of dried flowers, while children darted through the chilly breeze. For a small town, the fair wasn't just about trade. It was proof they still existed together. Farah came early, her hijab a pale blue, brighter than ever before. She set up a small table at the corner of the square, a hand-lettered sign in shaky English, your name in Persian calligraphy. At first, no one came near. People walked past, glancing sideways before moving on. Farah drew a breath, steadying her hand as she dipped a reed pen into the black ink. Then a blonde boy edged closer. "Could you write my name? I'm Ethan." Farah smiled. The first lines curved and flowed across the white paper. When she handed it to him, his eyes lit up. "It looks like a picture!" His delight spread quickly. Soon, children lined up, and adults stopped to watch. A homemaker asked for her name to paste on her cookie jar. A blacksmith requested his wife's, eyes misting as he studied the elegant, unfamiliar strokes. Farah bent over each sheet, treating every name as if she were cradling a life. Each mark of ink was a thread tying her to this place in a language no longer foreign. From a distance, Pastor John watched. He heard laughter, saw faces soften. Quietly, he thought, perhaps this community needs her more than they know, and if they need her, there might be reason enough to keep her here. Across the square, Hank stood with arms folded against the fence, his cap shadowing half his face. He didn't step forward, didn't call her name, but his lips curved into the faintest smile, a rare one, seen by no one but Farah. She looked up, catching his gaze, and for the first time, instead of lowering her eyes, she smiled back. A small smile, but steady. Hank tipped his head in a quiet nod. Few words, yet heavier than applause. The Redfield radio station sat on the second floor of the old post office at the corner of Main Street. The faded red brick building carried a weathered sign, WRED, that creaked in the wind. It wasn't a big station, just a place for farm reports, weather forecasts, and the occasional announcement about fairs or church suppers. But here, it was the town's common voice, the one people tuned into every morning. Pastor John brought Farah there. The wooden stairs groaned under their steps. Farah clutched her pale blue hijab tighter around her shoulders, her heart pounding as if every beat echoed on the stairs. The studio was no more than a cramped room, just big enough for a wooden desk, a microphone, a headset, and a window overlooking the still street below. The host, Mr. Harris, a kind-faced man with silver hair, shook Farah's hand warmly.
No need to be nervous. It's just a conversation. Pretend no one's listening, all right?
Farah nodded, though her hands trembled. Pastor John placed a hand gently on her shoulder, silent, but his eyes said, "Just be yourself." When the signal light blinked on, Harris's voice filled the headphones, steady and warm.
Welcome to WRED, the voice of Redfield. Today we have a special guest, Farah from Afghanistan, now living here under sponsorship. Welcome, Farah.
Hello.
A single word, but her voice traveled through the airwaves into kitchens, pickup trucks, and grocery aisles. At Hank's repair shop, the old radio crackled, carrying her sound into the silence. Harris asked about her journey. Farah hesitated, then began. About Kabul, the secret classes for girls, mothers whispering as they brought their daughters, the gunfire, the shadow of the Taliban.
Night was when people disappeared, and I lost my mother in one of those nights.
The studio air thickened. Through the glass, Pastor John bowed his head, gripping the worn Bible he always carried. Harris nodded slowly, his voice lowered.
But you made it here. Could you introduce yourself to everyone in your own words?
Farah lifted her head and drew a deep breath. This time her voice steadied.
My name is Farah. In my language, it means joy. I'm still learning how to live up to that name.
A pause. Harris didn't interrupt. Farah continued, clearer now, almost surprised by the strength in her own tone.
I did not come here just to survive. I want to live. And I've learned that staying shouldn't come from pity, but from trust. I want to stay, and I hope Redfield wants that too.
When the recording light went dark, Farah slipped off the headset. Her hands still shook, but a small smile touched her lips. Pastor John stepped forward, his eyes damp, his smile radiant.
You just did something very hard, and you did it well.
Outside in a cafe, spoons paused mid-stir as people listened. In a truck cab, a driver turned the dial lower, frowning in thought. In the cluttered repair shop, Hank sat alone, his pale eyes fixed on the old radio, silent and still. Night lay quiet over Redfield. Inside the repair shop, only the yellow lamp spilled across the workbench. Hank sat alone, the old radio Farah had once broken resting before him. He adjusted the dial, listening to the static laced with a faint voice drifting from the local station. He hadn't caught the whole broadcast, just fragments. Farah's voice, trembling yet resolute. He set the screwdriver down and stilled. His rough hand brushed over the scratched metal casing, recalling the day she had clumsily damaged it. Her shy glance, her soft "thank you" in uncertain English. He had barked at her then, but now that same radio carried her voice, filling the room he had long believed to be his tomb. A low, rasping laugh escaped him, foreign to his own ears.
Damn it, Farah.
He leaned back in his chair, his palm still resting on the radio. Static hummed, woven with a thin thread of old country music spreading across the workshop. Hank closed his eyes, breathing out slowly. Then, as though testing something long forgotten, he whispered her name aloud, just for himself.
You.
The name trembled in the air, brief but raw. For the first time he spoke it not in frustration, not in silence, but as an admission. The radio crackled on, bearing witness without a word. A few weeks after the radio broadcast, Pastor John came to the small room Farah rented. He carried a thick stack of papers, edges curled from passing through many hands. When he set it on the table, Farah blinked in surprise. Then her chest tightened at the bold words on the cover. Petition to the Immigration Office. Her eyes fell on her name printed at the top of the first page. Just below, signatures trailed one after another. The scratchy scrawl of the bakery owner who was always frowning. The heavy ink of the blacksmith with soot-darkened skin. Even the shaky handwriting of old Mrs. Whitmore, who had once eyed Farah with suspicion in church. Names she never expected were there too, people who had once turned away, now leaving their mark in ink. Farah's fingers trembled as they traced the lines. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred until the words dissolved into tears. A strange warmth surged through her chest, as if the entire town, hesitant and guarded as it had been, was finally reaching out its hand.
They want you to stay. You gave them a reason to believe.
His voice was slow, solemn, but his eyes steady with faith. Farah clutched the papers to her chest, afraid that if she let go they might vanish. For the first time she felt she wasn't just an assigned guest in Redfield. She was, however small, a part of it. But Pastor John wasn't finished. He rested a hand on her shoulder, his tone grave.
This petition will help, but it may not be enough. The final decision is still in immigration's hands.
The words fell like cold rain in sunlight. Farah's faint smile disappeared, her heart clenched. Even with the town behind her, the road ahead was uncertain. A single paper from a distant office could still decide her fate. Stay or leave, belong or vanish once more. She shut her eyes, hugging the stack tighter. Pastor John's voice went on, but all she felt was a heavy stillness, as though the floor beneath her had shifted. One late afternoon, Hank came. He didn't say much, only gestured for her to follow. They walked along the dirt path toward the hill behind town, where spring winds whispered through the birch trees. It was the end of May, and Redfield glowed with rare peace. Soy fields sprouted green across the earth, birds chattered in the hedgerows, and rain still gleamed on the path. Hank walked ahead, tall, stooped, but steady. Farah followed, gripping her coat. She didn't ask where he was taking her. She simply walked, her heart thrumming with both nerves and wonder. At last, the birch grove opened, revealing a wooden house. The red-tiled roof sagged, some windows buried in dust, the porch groaning as if ready to give way. It stood like something abandoned, waiting for someone to decide. Let it collapse, or bring it back to life. Hank stopped, placed a hand on the door, and turned the handle. The hinges shrieked as it swung open to a dim interior. He didn't step inside at once. Instead, he looked at Farah, hesitation rare in his eyes.
I once thought I'd let it fall apart, but now I think maybe it could be different.
Farah crossed the threshold slowly. The air smelled of wood rot and dust, yet late sunlight streamed in, laying golden stripes across the floor. Empty, yes, but not lifeless. It was like a blank page waiting to be written on. On a rickety table lay something small, the old flashlight Hank had given her during the blackout. Its scratched casing had been polished clean. Farah froze for a breath. Hank stepped closer, his voice rough, dragged up from deep inside.
They signed. They want you here. But I need more than that. I don't want you to stay out of pity. I want you to stay, because I believe, and if you believe too, then stay with me.
The last words stumbled as though he had to fight them out. Farah's chest tightened. This wasn't the awkward, rain-soaked proposal of weeks past. This was a confession, bare and unguarded. She stepped to the table, lifted the flashlight and turned it. A beam of pale gold trembled across the wall, fragile but unwavering. She turned back to Hank, meeting his gaze. She didn't need words. She nodded. In that instant, Hank felt a weight slide from his shoulders, a burden carried for decades. He strode to the window, flung it open. Wind rushed in, carrying the scent of wildflowers, damp earth, and children's laughter drifting from town. The old house seemed to stir, as if waking from a long sleep. Farah stood at the doorway, looking out over the town. The sunset blazed across rooftops, fields, and winding streets. In her chest rose a rare stillness, not the silence of loneliness, but the calm of someone who had found an anchor. She stepped fully into the room, the flashlight firm in her hand. That simple act was her answer. Hank said nothing more. He only stood watching her. Dusk spilled over, tinting the house in a warm red glow, and Farah knew her name, Farah, meaning joy, had finally found a home in the old house on the hill beside a man who was learning at last how to begin again. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.